Hi ladies, welcome back. You're on the Purposeful Living YouTube channel or the Purposeful Living webpage. And this is our Thursday growth series. We're talking about the Exodus and it's titled Be Brave. And we are moving on to our second session and it's Encountering God. And so in our last week's talk, we talked about how two women were women of influence and changed the course of history by saving the male babies when the Pharaoh or the king of Egypt told them to kill them after birth. And they refused to do that, and God blessed them. And from that story, Moses was saved. And fast forward a little bit, Moses grew up in the palace in Egypt. And when he became older, he fled Egypt and he went to Midian, got married, had children, and he was taking care of sheep for his father-in-law. And one of the things that his first encounter or major encounter with God, he was tending the sheep, and then in Exodus chapter 3, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. Wow, that's amazing. And as Moses looked at the bush, he saw that it was on fire, but it was not consumed. And so Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't this bush burning up? So when the Lord saw that Moses had gone over to investigate the bush, God called out from this burning bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. And Moses answered, Here I am. And so this is his first major encounter with God. And God, as we talk on, we're going to see what he was calling him to go with him to help lead out the people of Egypt who are still in bondage. But there's a lot of things in our life is there something that God is trying to get our attention and say, hey, Christina, I need you to do something with me. Can I get your attention? Can you look over here at me? Can you focus your attention on me for a second? I have something I want to tell you. And so Moses answered and he said, Here I am, God. And so in Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 through 22, the Lord talks to Moses and he said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and I've heard them crying because of their oppressors, and I know about their suffering, and I have come down to rescue them. God says, I hear you. I hear them. It is time. And he says, I'm going to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians to bring them in the land that is a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And so because the Israelites' cry for help has come to me, I've also seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. And therefore go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh, Moses, that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out. And so in this story, God was getting Moses' attention because he had an assignment, because his people had a need. He was calling Moses to help others. And so I wonder in our life if God is trying to get our attention because he needs us to help. He needs us to step out. So, but you'll see this interesting, and it's human nature. God, I'm not good enough. I don't have enough skills. I'm not eloquent enough. Are you really calling me? Can I get a couple signs first? And that's exactly what Moses did. But in verse 11, he talked about Moses asked God, who am I that I should go? Why are you even picking me, God? But God said to him in verse 12, I will certainly be with you. And that is such a comfort to us, is that God will, when he calls you to help or to do something or to help others or take a step of faith with him, he says, I will certainly be with you. And in verse 19, he says, however, I know the king of Egypt will not allow you to go, even under force from a strong hand. So he's saying, I know in the natural that the Egyptian king is not just going to let you walk out with the people of the Israelites out of Egypt. In the natural, it's going to be able to be accomplished. But he said, but when I stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with my miracles, I will perform in it. After that, I will perform in Egypt. After that, he will let you go. So even sometimes when we think it's all on us, this heavy weight that we have to do it all on our own. And God's saying, it's not about you. I just want you to be willing. I just want you to go. And he says that it is my miracles, and that is what's going to break the bondage. It's me. I just need you to go with me. He says, I'm going to be with you every step of the way, but will you go with me? Because no matter what, I am freeing my people from oppression out of Egypt, God says. And it's interesting, when we are in the dark, everything looks dark. We can't see the next step, that it may be the morning, because it seems like a struggle. Everything seems like a struggle, and sometimes we don't see the way out of the struggle. But it's so interesting that God has a plan for you and I, because in Genesis, it says, even with the people that were in bondage, in Genesis, he had already had a plan. That's the first book in the Bible. And we're in Exodus, which is the second. And in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 17, it says, I will confirm my covenant that is between me and you and your future offspring. So this is Abraham, the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. He says it's a permanent covenant or permanent contract between God and the God of your offspring, or all your children and your descendants. And he said, and you and your future offspring, I will give the land where you are residing as a permanent possession, and I will be their God. So God's saying, I already have a plan, and now this plan is going to be coming into fruition. It's that time to leave Egypt. And so sometimes when we see the dark, we don't think about that God already has a plan for us, our way out. He already has a solution. He already has the way. He already has the people lined up. And so we have to remember that there's a good plan for our lives. Even when it looks the darkest, there is hope in the future. So what did God ask Moses to do? So he's got Moses' attention. He says, here I am. God says, he wants us to be brave and choose the next right step with him, or to walk in his steps. And that's another word for obedience. But Moses said, what if they don't believe me? So he's going through his doubts like you and I would go through. So God gives him a sign, and he says, okay, Lord, but I'm still not good enough. I don't think I can speak. And the Lord said to him, who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you to speak, and I will teach you what to say. And then finally Moses says, but I just don't want to. Moses says, please, Lord. In verse 13, he says, just send someone else. But then at this time, the Lord was frustrated with him, but he even provided provision for him. He said, isn't your brother coming? You're going to be happy. He's going to be happy when you see him. He speaks well. I will send your brother with you. And he said, I will let him speak. I will teach you both what to speak, and I will be with you. So even in our provision, he provides us provision, that when we're obedient, when we take that next right step with him, to take that next step when he calls us, he's going to provide us everything we need. And we think sometimes we get discouraging with suffering, but in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 36, it starts the story about Jesus in the garden when he was praying right before he was going to be crucified. And even Jesus didn't want to go. But there was one thing that he wanted to do above all else, is to be obedient to what the Father wanted him to do. And he said that he asked his friends to pray. He says, I'm deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here with me, or stay here with me and pray. And he said, but this is what the prayer he prayed. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And he prayed this prayer 3 times, and he was eventually strengthened. And he went to the cross for us. But in his suffering, because he was obedient, he suffered for our disobedience, and he allowed us to be free. He allowed us to walk in abundance. He allowed us to reach out to him and ask him for help when we're in need, for that peace and that strength. And just think about in James chapter 1, it talks about be joyful when you're experiencing trials or struggles or hardship. Why is that? Because that's not natural. He says this is why. Because the testing of your faith produces endurance. When we lean into him, we take that next right step with him, it causes us to endure. It causes us to trust. It causes us to grow. And I just want to leave this with you, that when we lean on him, we wait in his presence. Sometimes he tells us to wait and to suffer just a little bit longer because the end story is so much better. And sometimes he takes us right out. And this is what the Hebrews were doing. It's time. The Lord says, it's time. I'm leading you out of Egypt. But he says, if you will, in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3, it says, you will keep him in perfect peace. The Lord will keep you in perfect peace if your mind stays on him, thinks on him, rests on him, because you trust in him. And he calls us to take that next right step with him and to trust in him. So ladies, I hope you have a great Thursday as we take our next right step with him.